Hello, everybody. So great to have you folks joining us this afternoon in the fourth of our four-part series in year three of the Middle Years webinar series, which we've called Engaging All Learners in the Middle Years. And this year, we've had a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the feedback that I've had, not just through Twitter, but through emails, and now more recently in person, is that there's no better time that we could have done this, or as Bryan would say, it's about time. It's about time you invited me to this series. My name is Leyton Schnellert. I could have said that at the beginning, and I'll be your host for this afternoon. And I'm a faculty member at the University of British Columbia, and I'm so fortunate to be the academic advisor or the academic lead for our middle years cohort. And so I spend my time in schools with middle years learners, engaging with them and their questions and their wonderings and their fantastic learning weekly. And I will say that this week I was out on the floodplain with a group of middle years kids doing some restoration work. And one kid turned to me and said, "Dr. Schnellert, I found a symbiotic relationship." And so that was my highlight of the week. Oh, so great. We just wanted to talk or mention our partners in this moment. So the Edith Landau Virtual Learning Center has been a wonderful partner this year, and they will send out the recording in about a week's time. And you are welcome to share this recording with colleagues. I know folks have been using snippets at staff meetings and team meetings. Our session goes from 3:15 to 4:45, and you can see that we've had a number of really fantastic speakers over the course of the series, and you can check out the previous sessions on the Edith Landau website. We're also working in partnership with the Rural Education Advisory, the Greater Victoria School District, and we're so fortunate to have some funding from the province, from the Ministry of Education in this work with this specific attention to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and let's just say belonging in the middle years. I'd also like to just take a moment to acknowledge that I live and I learn and I research on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx people as a settler guest. I'm so fortunate. Just yesterday, I was working with elders and educators down in Penticton. With their work, they're working in partnership with us to take care of the land and teach us how to take care of the land. And so I really acknowledge and respect how I'm learning from the Syilx and their knowledge, their language, their history, as well as from their ongoing relationship to the land and the natural world and their stewardship. The Syilx have taken care of their homelands for thousands of years. And now that I live here, it's also my obligation to aspire towards better understanding how I can engage in respectful acts of decolonization, both personally and professionally. And you can see the floodplain I was just talking about, where we saw the symbiotic relationship between the screech owl and the woodpecker, was here at the Floodplain Reengagement Project, which is led by Syilx scientists. And we know that in each of our contexts, we have opportunities to collaborate with folk from our communities in ways where we make change together, not on behalf of, but together we do that work in partnership. I'll pass the torch now to Tammy Renyard.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to acknowledge that the Greater Victoria School District is on the ancestral territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And I took this picture on the weekend hiking, and it was a reminder to me and this work that we're doing with you. We feel fortunate in Greater Victoria to have folks networking and doing this work, but honestly, the greater conversation in the province and beyond has been super important for us. And so I just wanted to say thank you at this time to Leyton and to all the speakers we've had so far for walking alongside us and helping us learn and grow and strengthen our collective capacity. Because as a district, we continue to work with our local nations to do the work in a better way. And I think this conversation we're having in this series and the conversation today is so important for all of us to feel confident and competent in the work that we're doing in our districts and schools to lead to a better future for all. So just so much gratitude for you for being here. I know it's a busy time of year, and we're just grateful that you're here and part of this conversation. So thanks to all.
We're just so excited to have Beth Applewhite, Beth, who I've known at least 16 years, we just figured out. And Beth and I got to work together in SFU's grad diploma and master's programs. And Beth has been doing this work in equity before anybody else I know, in terms of really centering and lifting up the voices of Black educators, kids, people in the communities, and recognizing their contributions. And Beth, I'm super excited about your role in your district and your leadership work, not just there, but in the province. And it's about time. Bryan Gidinski is also with us today too. And Bryan's work as a district SOGI support teacher in Burnaby is not just well known in his context, but he's been supporting folks in roles across the province, thinking about making change in their context in the same way that from the ground in relationship, he's been doing that work in Burnaby. We welcome you, Beth and Bryan, and just let me know when you're ready for those breakout rooms and I'll press the button.
Awesome.
Thank you.
We always feel a little intimidated by having an introduction that makes us sound really good, because we don't necessarily like to have high expectations. It's always nice to kind of have moderate expectations, because they're so much easier to kind of reach and perhaps exceed. But we will certainly do our best to keep things on track and engaging for you. Start with the question on our title page of here of, do you want a future of decency, equality, and real social justice? And that's kind of the conversation that we want to start today. Just want to quickly do a land acknowledgement. We are coming to you here from Burnaby. And so we humbly acknowledge that our learning, unlearning, and relearning is taking place on the unceded, unsurrendered, and traditional territories of the Coast Salish nations of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And for me, one of the things that I appreciate most about the area in which I work is that I often get the opportunity to cycle as my commute from buildings that I'm entering and engaging with. And it's been a really sort of interesting experience of cycling and having the environment of the beauty of the natural environment and, the diversity of the environment here through my neighborhoods and through my city. And then at the same time to have construction on a pipeline. And it's such a weird sort of contrast. And it keeps sort of bringing me back to this idea about how in so many ways we've often neglected Indigenous voices. And now seeing some of this construction and some of the erosion of the beauty of some of these neighborhoods, I'm certainly questioning what our wisdom has been in some of these scenarios.
Okay, so this afternoon we'll be doing some adult learning, and we'd like to set a few norms. Just to remind everyone, we all come to this work, to EDI work, with different lived experiences, and no one's lived experience is better than or less than anyone else's lived experience. They're all equally important. And we want you to know that when we have sometimes these difficult conversations, they can sometimes be uncomfortable. It's new learning for some folks. If you need to leave the room, please do so. And if you need to take a break, please take one. Take good care of yourself. Please take care of yourself and breathe. Take a deep breath. And if you're just hopping on now and you missed the norms, just show up human. So easy. If we just remember to show up human, who are we as human beings if we ignore the suffering of others? We know that some of our students, some of our colleagues, some of our families are suffering, have traumatic lived experiences, are in pain, and how we need to be there and care and not ignore that pain, that suffering. As uncomfortable as it may make us feel, we have to be cognizant and mindful in our planning, in our structure, and our choice of resources. Being human is a given, but keeping our humanity is a choice. So we're going to do an exercise that if you've been on a webinar or an event with me before, you may have done, but this is an exercise I like to do quite often throughout the year because it shows me my blind spots. So we're going to do something called listening circles. And I'd like to just acknowledge my good friend, Riley McMitchell, who's in VSB, worked with VSB, and he first introduced this to me about 4 years ago. So we're going to look at, who do you listen to? Who makes up your environment? Who's in your inner circle? Who are your confidants, your critical friends? And we're going to figure out if it looks more like the homogeneous picture there, or like these two critters on the beach. These two definitely move through the world and through their lived experiences quite differently. And I'm sure the birds, if you notice them up in the sky, yet again, experiencing the world from quite a different viewpoint and seeing the world differently. So if you could please take a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, I'd like you to try to copy the circles that you see. You don't have to write core circle or close circle. Just draw a circle inside a circle inside of circle, 3 circles. I'll give you a moment just to grab your paper. I want you to think about your close friends, your close family, your confidants, people you turn to and listen to when you are excited and you want to celebrate something, the first person you'd call, or if you're having a moment, you need a sanity check, when you are struggling. Let's do the first circle, the innermost circle. These are your most dearest, closest friends and family. So yes, you can include colleagues if you have colleagues that close with you, and yes, you can include family. These are the folks that you could show up on their doorstep in the middle of the night and they would take you in, and you would take a phone call from them in the middle of the night. This is if you are stuck in a jam and you need a few $100, those are your folks. So you can, you don't have to worry about confidentiality here. If you want to just put their first name or their initials, and we're happy to have you recycle this paper after we're done, or you might want to keep it though to look and see how it changes in the future. So in the innermost circle, these folks probably know when your birthday is, and you know when theirs is. If someone's going through a breakup, you know about it, and you probably even know why and the dramatic details. These are the people you really lean into when you're struggling, and these are the first people you want to call when you're celebrating. If you've ever seen any of the movies from Meet the Parents, as Robert De Niro said, inner circle, circle of trust. And then the close circle are people that you would definitely call if you couldn't reach anyone in the innermost circle. They're your next call. These are folks you want to talk things through before you have, let's say you need to talk with someone. It's going to be a difficult or uncomfortable conversation. And you want someone to talk through it with beforehand. These are folks you meet for dinner, go for lunch. These are close friends, close colleagues, neighbors that you've known for years. If you have children, these are people that you would feel comfortable leaving your children with. And if you have pets, you would equally feel comfortable leaving them with them to take good care of them. And then finally, in the outer circle, these are definitely close colleagues and friends. These are people that you, of course, trust, but you may not tell your deepest, innermost secrets. You may not share those. These are people that you may not feel comfortable borrowing money from, or showing up on their doorstep in the middle of the night for a place to stay. These are people that you're really close to, but it would be a bit odd if they phoned you in the middle of the night. You still have inside jokes. these may be people that you could see one day moving into your core circle, but maybe they're new friends and new colleagues. And so we have them on the outer circle for now. Maybe you have some inside jokes, but in the core circle, you have inside jokes that go back decades. Okay, if we were together on one day soon, hopefully, we would have tables and people would be sitting around with colors and markers and highlighters, but we don't have that. So I'm going to call upon your artistic skills, but don't worry, no one can see and no one's watching. So no pressure. So you have all your folks. These are your people from the innermost circle to the outer circle. So now we're going to put them in some categories. Go ahead. I want you to please circle everyone in all the circles who consider themselves BIPOC. So if you have any Black, Indigenous, folks of color, anywhere on your circles, please put a circle around their name. Some people ask me, well, Beth, what if they're multiracial or biracial? It's up to you. I say for sure, especially biracial folks often have similar, not the same, but experiences as racialized folks. So they'll have that lens. Okay, next. I'd like you to put a star inside all of the circles. If you have any circles, you may not have any circles, but if you do, put a star in the circles for folks who identify as Indigenous, Métis, Indigenous. And we're doing this for all 3 circles. Next step. Please put a square, and you may have to put a square around a circle, right? Please put a square. I used to say box, but I don't want to box people in, right? Please put a square around members of the LGBTQ plus community.
I have a lot of squares.
And next, please put a heart. Look for your boxes. If you may not have any boxes, but if you have boxes, I would like you to put a heart if your friend or family member is transgender. And if you have friends or family members with physical disabilities who are thriving with a physical disability, please put a cloud around their name. Now, I want you to think about your own cultural heritage background. Like, are you a Black person? Are you Indigenous? Are you white? Are you South Asian? Are you Asian? And I want you to put a triangle on top of the name of every person who is the same racial or cultural heritage as you. What are we noticing? We just like to, if you're feeling brave enough to share, if you were noticing some surprises, please put your thoughts and feelings in the chat. We're not going to have a breakout for this, but this is a good exercise to do with yourself. When we talk about anti-racism and equity work, that you need to start with yourself. You need to unpack your own bias, try to find your own blind spots. This is the work. This is what it looks and feels like. You can see that a friend of mine, Tanya, in my innermost circle a few years ago, that she's half pink. Well, that we were highlighting Indigenous friends and family, and she had had just found out her father was Métis, and so that was just me trying to make myself feel better. Yeah, you can feel a little guilty. The point wasn't to make you feel guilty. No shame, no blame. This is just to learn and grow, and to see who you're listening to, and to see that maybe a lot of your friends, even if they're diverse, even if they're multicultural and different walks of life, but maybe you all are middle class. You all sort of, speak the same language, went to the same types of schools, are in education, right? So just be mindful. Like I said earlier, we all come to this with different lived experiences. And if you're going to start to expand your circles, please know we're not suggesting that you be performative about that and say, hey, I need this person or this type of person to be in my circle. Of course not. Relationships, as we know, grow organically, right? But there are ways when you're going out for lunch from school or on a pro D to invite more people to come with, people you don't normally sit with, people you don't normally share with, and just try to build those relationships, work on projects. If you have a new initiative, invite different voices to the table and set that table with them instead of setting it first and inviting them later. But when folks do tell you what it feels like to walk in their shoes, then we really need to listen, believe, and validate. Even when it doesn't reconcile with our own experience, even when we're shocked, surprised, can't believe we didn't see it, didn't know about it. Sometimes we feel a little ignorant, and that's not a good feeling, to feel ignorant and to feel like you've been blind to some people's pain in your life. But it's important work, and it's in that acknowledgement and in that discomfort that the growth and the opportunity for learning happens. This is really hard work for most people to do, but this is the hard work that we need to do.
And then as we shift into, we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of representation. And I just want to share that the very first time that I did this activity that Beth facilitated was really eye-opening for me. And it was really quite fascinating to see who I regarded as kind of my influential voices. And it was also really interesting that when I started to look at certain categories, when I was looking at people that might be Indigenous or people that might be BIPOC, it was also interesting that I had people who were in my lives and were influencing those perspectives that I actually hadn't put in my circle. And it was interesting to just kind of reflect on why I hadn't put them in my circles when they did have an influence. So it's all this very sort of fluid conversation about who is influencing us, who we share things with, how we perceive the world in our relationship with others. And it's always important to be thinking about representation. And we're sort of moving a little bit into the conversation about what this looks like in schools, in classrooms, in communities. And I thought it was kind of ironic that, Beth shared a slide that related specifically to being human. And so I thought that I would start my conversation here by sharing this image of someone who is not human. And you might be familiar with this character. This is Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, from the Avengers. And there's kind of an interesting little representation story that's attached to this particular character. And some of you, this was sort of one of those good feel-good stories that shows up in the media. And a parent had taken their child to the cinema and had watched one of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. And the child was actually really excited and sort of gestured at the screen and said, "Hey, that's me." And the parent was a little bit surprised, like, how does that equate? And what was really interesting is if you're familiar with this character, you know that, he doesn't really get sarcasm. He takes everything quite literally. And in the situation, the child was someone who was on the spectrum. And so had some of those similar traits, similar behaviors, and was identifying with those behaviors on the screen, which was a really sort of powerful and important and a positive experience. And one of the things I always like to sort of ask people if they know who this is, and under normal circumstances, I'd give a little bit of time for us to consider who this is and what the significance of this person is. For those of you who don't recognize this image is now over 20 years old. And this is an image of Matthew Shepard. And some of you might be more familiar with the name than the image. But if you don't know Matthew Shepard's story, you should. He was a young college student who was lured, a young gay college student who was lured into a field, beaten, and left tied to a fence post to succumb to his death. And so the reason that I share that story and the reason that I share this image and start a conversation about representation with this is that for a very long time, when I was a young closeted gay man, Matthew Shepard was the most famous gay person that I knew of. And there wasn't a lot of representation in the schools that I attended, in the books that I read, in the cinema that was available to me. And I just sort of reflect back on how devastating it was that somebody who I identified with had such a tragic story. And so it's nice that now we have better representation. We have, athletes. Here's a couple of examples of athletes, Tom Daley and Gus Kenworthy, who are both Olympic athletes who have come out at the height of their careers and been relatively well received. And it's not that they haven't dealt with homophobia and sort of garbage or ignorant behavior, but it hasn't impacted their sponsorship. It hasn't impacted their livelihoods, and they've been able to be out and be visible. I also want to just acknowledge that they're two very white men, and that the experience of Black gay men is quite different than the experience of white gay men, and that's an important distinction to make. And so as we talk about representation and we talk about visibility, many of you are probably familiar and have seen Black Panther. And for many, many years, so this was a film released recently that had a cast that was principally Black. There's only two token white guys in the movie. But what's really significant about this cast and about this particular movie is that it's not about slavery, and like the empowerment and the heroics and like even the feminism in the movie in terms of the way that women are represented, Black women are represented, is a really powerful thing. And Beth can actually comment on what a powerful sort of experience it was.
Yes, I'm so excited. My family, our friends in the Black community, and the school I was at in 2018 when the movie premiered was Johnson Heights Secondary in Surrey. And so community members donated tickets for us to take 40 plus students to see Black Panther the day after it premiered. So the Thursday night, so we went on the Friday matinee, and the students were so excited to see themselves represented on film and to know that it was a mostly Black cast and crew and a Black director was huge. And they asked if the kids came up with the idea, let's wear our various African nations garb. Can we dress up? And so I'm like, why not? And so even the students who weren't originally from an African nation or the Caribbean, because there was lots of Afro-Caribbean outfits that day, participated and wore what represented their own cultural heritage, be it from the Middle East or Canadian Indigenous students. We had kids bring Aztec heritage clothing and jewelry from South America. It was just amazing. And to this day, if I run into one of these students, they will say, Miss A, Wakanda forever.
In addition to that, you had, in a similar time frame around 2018, you had Crazy Rich Asians. Similar response to this movie, again, a principally Asian cast. And that type of movie had not been seen since sometime in the 80s when the Joy Luck Club was made. And so you see sort of these positive experiences, these joyful experiences. And people had similar reactions of just seeing themselves and people who looked like them, who represented aspects of their culture, were being represented on the big screen. And then I want to acknowledge this movie, Love, Simon. Many of you hopefully have seen all of these movies. I have to admit, I've enjoyed all of them, some of them more than I was expecting to. But Love, Simon was really significant because it was the first gay rom-com that was financed by a major studio from start to finish. And what's kind of significant about this movie and why I think this is a really sort of pivotal movie is that if you were a young queer kid who wanted to see a movie with gay representation, often you would have to go to sort of an art theater. Often the movies were restricted. And so there was really limited access for young queer people to see themselves represented. And with a movie like Love, Simon, somewhere in Burnaby, you could go to a multiplex theater. You could tell your parents you were going to go see Black Panther, and you could actually go and see Love, Simon. And so I share this with you because I really want people to be thinking about when we are choosing the resources for our classrooms, when we are starting conversations in our classrooms, in our learning spaces, how important it is for our learners to see themselves reflected in the resources, in the conversations, in the videos we share, so that they feel empowered and they feel connected, they feel like they belong. And then I just kind of want to share this slide too, because when the casting for the live version movie of The Little Mermaid was announced, this young Black actress, Hailey Bailey, was cast, and the racist comments that flooded social media were really saddening. And I look at this and I think, oh, this is great. And like, I see those two pictures together and I'm like, I can see a resemblance. I'm excited. She's incredibly talented. She has a brilliant vocal ability. And I was thinking, wow, I'm pretty enlightened. I'm pretty progressive. Look at how easy it is for me to accept this person in a role that a lot of people aren't accepting her in. And then what was really interesting is I was having a conversation with someone in my call who said, yeah, but Bryan, why didn't you see Aquaman? And it was interesting a bit on why I didn't see Aquaman. And part of it for me was the casting. And when I think about what my own experience and my familiarity with Aquaman and how I identified and connected with Aquaman, I had trouble seeing Jason Momoa as Aquaman. And so it was really interesting. And I think that one of the things we have to really be aware of is we sort of, talk the talk, and then we have to always sort of be in that space where we're being reflective about, am I also walking the talk? And do my actions reflect the things I'm saying, the things I believe? And sometimes, being open to being challenged and being reflective about what might not align is really valuable. And then, so what we're going to do is, this is going to lead shortly into our breakout, is hopefully many of you have been able to print out the maze that we've asked you to print. We're going to invite you to complete the maze, but we have a set of instructions that are important in terms of completing the maze. And so what we want you to do is imagine that you have 1,000 points that you're going to start the maze with. Every time that you touch a wall of the maze, so anytime you're not in the blank space, you accidentally touch a wall, imagine that you're going to deduct 50 points. Let's assume for the time being that you have some sort of recorder that's going to record the points for you. You don't have to worry about recording the points, but just have a sense of how many points you might be losing. You're going to have 5 minutes to complete this maze. So the last instruction, which is one of the most important instructions, is that we're asking everyone to complete the maze using their left hand. So those are the instructions. That's the parameters of the task. We invite you to go ahead and complete the maze, and then we'll ask you to do some reflection on it when we go into breakout rooms.
Great. Bryan, do you just want to remind us of the prompt one more time, and I'll send us off?
Yeah. So how did it feel to attempt to complete the task under the prescribed conditions? Or if you didn't have a printout, how did it feel to be excluded from attempting the task?
Great. I'll send us in the break rooms for about 8 minutes. Have a good chat, everybody. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to pass the torch back to Beth and Bryan. How lovely it is to have conversations with folks from across the province. Thanks for creating this opportunity for us, Beth and Bryan.
Awesome. So what we would like to invite you to do is to put some thoughts on how it felt. What are some of the feelings you experienced in trying to do that task or in being unable to do that task? And if you could just take and just put those into the chat, and we'll get a little bit of a cascade of experiences. So we're seeing several people who experienced some frustration. We're seeing some people who were just determined and had their mindset that they were going to do it. We see that some people express feelings of feeling overwhelmed. Someone who's really thrilled that something catered to lefties for a change. Felt disadvantaged because it felt like it could have been done a better way. So lots of interesting experiences in terms. I'll tell you why we invited you to participate in that task is that often we start some of these heavy conversations, things like conversations about privilege. And sometimes you say the word privilege and you watch some of the white males in the room cringe and get defensive and shut down. And then all of a sudden you can't have a conversation about privilege in a meaningful way. And so what I like to kind of do is use this particular activity as sort of an analogy for privilege. Because essentially what we did is we created a set of circumstances, we created a system that certainly advantaged one group of people over another. Everyone had the same potential and could work as hard to complete the task. And yet, for a certain group of people, there may have been less obstacles for them to complete the task. And so what I have found in starting some of the conversations about privilege and sort of expanding into those really meaningful, vulnerable places about privilege is starting with something that is sort of symbolic and then moving into those conversations. Because when we can sort of agree what privilege is without sort of identifying the specific, whether it's white privilege, male privilege, able-bodied ability privilege, whatever it is, if we can start from a place where we just have a structure and a basic understanding, it sort of empowers us to go deeper into those conversations. And one of the things that keeps coming up in conversations and is often an impediment to these conversations is discomfort. And I actually have to tell you, this is one of my favorite images I've ever encountered. It's bad when the introverts are marching. And the idea that, there are these uncomfortable topics that we encounter that we need to be having conversations about. And I even use the examples of when you're in a partnership, if you're not having conversations about finances because that's uncomfortable, if you don't have those conversations in sort of a proactive way, often you're having them in crisis. and where, you don't have the capacity to kind of prevent some of the tragedies and some of the difficulties. And so when we talk about uncomfortable topics, one of the things that I like to do is say, if you're telling me, you're not ready for these conversations. I've been doing Soji for a number of years now, and I still get people who are saying, we're waiting for our community to become comfortable before we sort of enter into these conversations about sexual orientation and gender identity. And I say, okay, you know what? If you're uncomfortable, then how do I help you get to a place of comfort? And many of you are probably familiar with Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, and the idea that when we're very close, securely embedded in our comfort zone, we don't have to experience much growth because everything's familiar, we're comfortable, we don't want to challenge things. If we go to the other extreme and we're extremely anxious and we're overwhelmed, it's really hard to learn. But if we're in that sort of sweet spot where we are in a place where we're just outside of our comfort zone, that's where optimal learning can happen. And so when people sort of try to derail a conversation with, I'm not comfortable with this, or this is going to make people uncomfortable, this is one of the lenses that I like to sort of bring to that conversation to actually get it moving forward.
Yes, and we all, this is a movement. This is a movement. We all come to this seeking, as our first slide showed, justice, love, truth, equality, and equity. So we all come to this work with different lived experience and different interests. Some people come to this work through Black Lives Matter and the post George Floyd murder world that is the racial reckoning that was summer 2020. Some come through this to this work through trans rights, through the calls to action and reconciliation, through fighting against poverty, fighting against ableism, fighting for gender equality, fighting for so many different causes. I can't think of them all, but gender equality, it's fighting against poverty, fighting against for Latino rights, against Asian hate that we saw with COVID, for example. Next slide, please. But this is the thing. It is a movement, and there is a goal of living in a world where truth and justice will reign, where love will reign, where there's no more oppression, where we have true and authentic equity. But to be in that world, to be authentically a person with an equity lens, you can't be anti-racist and anti-Soji. We don't get to pick and choose the causes we will advocate for and the ones we won't. Because if you're truly being the work, then you don't get to choose what you will do and not do. You just are. You just are equitable. You just are anti-racist. Next slide. And so we do not want cultures of kindness and niceness. And this is hard for lots of folks because we have lots of t-shirts and hoodies, buttons and pins that say be kind. And some of them are really sweet. And I think they're super cute. They have bumblebees and they say be kind. Love it. But we have to recognize the danger in it. If we're going to have kindness campaigns and niceness campaigns in schools, we need to know the danger in that. We want cultures of boldness and vulnerability. And I'm going to let Dr. Robin D'Angelo share what we mean by that.
It takes courage. It takes commitment, but it also takes courage. And niceness is not courageous. So my point around that is that so many white people see the presence of niceness as an indicator of the absence of racism. And a culture of niceness is actually one that prevents us having difficult conversations about racism. It's generally a culture that's nice for me, but not necessarily nice for you. There's this idea that the way that I experience the world must be the way that you experience the world. So I find our our campus to be a very welcoming place. So wouldn't you feel it to be a welcoming place? Or this idea that if a policy is applied to everybody, then it's fair, even if the outcomes are not going to be the same.
So yes, so I hope she did a great, I think she did a great job of explaining that when we have a cultures of kindness and cultures of niceness in our schools, then it makes it really difficult to have those uncomfortable conversations that Bryan was just talking about. It's really hard to make space for discomfort, as we should, if we're going to learn and grow, when we're supposed to be treating everyone, nicely, and making sure we don't, upset anyone or make anyone's, too upset, or make anyone's head explode. We please know there's danger in niceness and kindness. I'll give you an example. It just happened to me this year. So I've been doing equity work and anti-racism work for over a decade, and I just fell prey to the trap of the danger of nice. After Black Excellence Day in January this year, the Whitecaps were so kind to and generous to donate their previous June 19th jerseys. So June 19th celebrates the emancipation of slavery, enslaved peoples in America. And sorry, there you go, Bryan. The jerseys were sought after, and we used them as prizes for the Black Excellence Day event that we had on Zoom across the province. And I was so excited to be able to give these out to students as prizes across the Lower Mainland. And one of our schools, I dropped it off, and then the jersey, and then the next day I got a call from the principal, who was sharing with me that the student, the winner, was a little upset and really concerned, and was sad that the jersey didn't fit, because it had never occurred to me that a student would want to wear it. It was wrapped in a box. It was a beautiful box with African designs. It had pages of authenticity inside, and you can tell it had been worn and signed. And there was like a pamphlet on the history of Juneteenth, and it was definitely something not to be worn. It was something packaged to be kept as a special keepsake. It had never occurred to me that the student, was from the South Sudan and a refugee, and the concept of a man cave where you hang jerseys on walls was not part of their experience. And so of course, not intentionally, but inadvertently, I harmed a child in my attempt to be nice. And I was so excited about how nice this was. And I didn't consider the potential for harm in that niceness and that kindness. So one last thing I want to share with you with the danger of nice, that activity we did, the listening circles, it's not lost on me, talking about uncomfortable conversations, that some people would have had a really difficult time putting names in any of those circles, that some people are living a very lonely life, and COVID kind of exacerbated that, right? For many. It's not lost on me that in England, they have a ministry of loneliness, for real, a ministry of loneliness. And so that was a blind spot I had when I first started doing this exercise, is I didn't used to acknowledge that, and didn't even think. I'm from an Afro-Caribbean background. There's constantly people and music and food coming in and out of the front door, right? So that was my blind spot, that some people, many people don't live that life, and they live lonely lives. So the danger of nice. And in this work, even though we make mistakes, and you will make mistakes, we're human, we need to take gentle care of ourselves. And we need to not try to do too much too soon. We're not asking you to run out and start an equity committee or a reading group or a club or put on a big conference. Sometimes as human beings, we overestimate what we can do in the short term and underestimate what we can do in the long term. It's most important to deal with ourselves first. I've been saying that for a few years, but I'm hoping people start to understand now that we can't just go out and do this work if we haven't dealt with ourselves. The more reflective we are, the more effective we are. Focus on what matters. Focus on things you can actually control. I love Loretta J. Ross, Black elder, African-American activist and writer, who says fighting hate should be fun. It's being a hater that sucks, right? There is joy in this work. It's not all doom and gloom. Like Bryan said, the discomfort, that's where the opportunity for learning and growth lives. And that's where the joy lives too. There's so much opportunity in this work. Pushback and resentment. If you get some pushback, you feel resentment and those rolling of the eyes, that's when you know you're doing this well. That's disruption. When you name it, talk about it, then folks can grow and learn to be better and do better.
Can I comment on that? Can I comment on that?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. And I just sort of want to extend on what Beth is saying, because a lot of the narrative that we're hearing in south of us around books,
CRT,
and who get CRT, LGBTQ identities, books being banned, not being able to say certain words, things like that. It's so interesting already to be in a space where the work that I'm doing, where I'm already starting to be called a pedophile and a groomer. And it's really interesting because I actually forwarded some of that to Beth, and I'm like, well, apparently I'm doing a decent job because I'm ticking off the right people. Mm-hmm. And it's something that is difficult to wear, but when we think and we converse about the needs of our youth who are experiencing trauma, who are overhearing these conversations that are so negatively directed at them, it kind of fuels us, and it just makes us want to do our work better, to enhance our influence, to look for new opportunities to share perspectives. And it kind of does become fun in sort of combating some of the ignorance that we encounter.
If we don't laugh, we'll cry, right? But whenever it's hard, the elders tell us, our Indigenous elders here in Burnaby, and for me, many Black elders in the community, that's how you know you're doing it right. Exactly what Bryan said, right? But we are human. But yes, you're absolutely right. Success is in the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. If you're going to do this work, you need to commit to the long haul, the long run, right? Like your trajectory should be far reaching and never ending. It is, for lack of a better word, a life journey. If you do this work and you start and then stop, you will harm families, you will harm children, you could harm colleagues. So if you're in it, be in it and stay in it. But the journey does have joy, and it does have growth and positivity, and most importantly, it has hope.
Yeah, and a lot of, sometimes the impact of our work is hard to see, but those conversations, and like when Beth talks about some of those students that went and saw Black Panther with her, like when you get those little comments, those little appreciations for putting youth in a position where they see themselves reflected, where they feel empowered, where they feel inspired, is one of the key pieces that we can do in all this work around equity and diversity and inclusion and creating cultures of belonging.
When you create learning opportunities that allow students to see themselves, their heritage, their family, their identity in their schoolwork, in their lessons, you will see a light. And many of you have probably seen this before. It's just this light that turns on. It's just, oh, who's this child I haven't met yet? It's amazing. And it just cancels any insult that we get online. It cancels being called a cancel queen, cancel culture queen, or that I make people racist in my anti-racism work. I just have to think about the students' faces and the light that turns on when they see themselves. You can't be what you can't see. So when they finally see themselves, it's just so amazing.
And that leads us to our last breakout conversation. And what we would, so hopefully you can be prepared to lead us into sessions shortly, Leyton, are what are the actions that you can take now that will ultimately lead to a culture of decency, equity, and social justice? What are some of the small steps that you can take in your learning context? What are some of the small steps that you can take in your personal and social contexts? And just really sort of think about the kinds of actions that you can commit to that will cumulatively achieve some of the goals that we have around equity, diversity, and inclusion.
That's okay. Well, welcome back, everybody. We are so glad that you joined us today. Beth and Bryan, I'll let you do your debrief and then I'll close.
Awesome. So what we just invite you to do is, what thoughts that you have around some of the actions you might be committing to and moving forward with, we invite you to drop those into the chat. It'll give you a little bit of perspective on some of the conversations in other breakout rooms, but what are some of those things that you want to do that you think will influence a culture of decency, equity, and social justice?
Can I just say ours out loud because it's longer to type, but
Yeah, Vicky, go ahead.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank
I
you.
was gratefully paired with a teacher librarian, like it was a magical, but we talked a lot, and thank you for bringing up the films. And we talked a lot about, making choices and bringing students' voice into having, the reading materials and what we're offering and laying out for how our students to see themselves in a variety of ways. And we also talked about hopefully moving forward so that it's sometimes it's, where students see themselves represented in like you said, in a rom-com. It's not about, the Indigenous experience or trauma informed. And that's important for some types of reading, but we also want our students to see themselves in living life, in a romance, navigating difficult friendships, in a sci-fi. And so thinking about how to have really a lot of diversity in that lens as well. So thank you.
Great, and thank you very much for
you.
sharing that. And I think that's really important is you've mentioned something that I think is important to highlight is that whole idea of I struggle with some of the lessons in Soji where it's like the book has been selected because there's for example, a trans character. And so the lesson becomes, this is what it means to be trans. And it's so interesting to watch how we normalize identities when instead of using that lesson as a tool to describe a particular other identity, we just have a trans character who experiences life and we just relate and connect to them. And so I think that's a really valuable thing that you've highlighted there and surfaced.
We want to celebrate all people's love, joy, contributions, achievements, struggles, yes, but oppression, yes, but also coming through that and being on the other side, helping others.
And ensuring that there's a range of stories instead of just a single.
The danger of a single story.
Yes. All right. Well, we thank you very much for what you've contributed. We thank you so much for your attention today. I know that this logging on and participating can extend your day, and many of you are doing such complex work in dynamic situations. So we're very grateful that you've taken the time to listen to us and to participate and to reflect. And so we offer much gratitude for your presence here today. And
we just encourage you to walk with grace and humility and encourage others to do better, to be better is even better. And that to remember there's no one right way to do this. There's no one right way. It has to be what works for you and what's best for the students and families you're working with. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you today.
Thanks, Beth and Bryan. A beautiful way to end our series together this year, and what a lovely piece that we can be sharing with our colleagues. The recording will come out in about a week's time, everybody. Just remember, in session 1, we had Shelley Moore and Leona Prince, who offered us perspectives from inclusion and disability, as well as Indigenous perspectives. In session 2, we had Sarah Florence Davidson, who talked about protocols for selecting Indigenous texts. And in session 3, we had Benjamin Datu and Shaheen Moussani and Mary Miller, really talking about weaving critical literacy into our teaching in math, science, social studies, and English. And today we thought about doing this work internally within ourselves in relationship to make change together. And I'm looking for more shapes in my community, not as performance, but to hear more perspectives to help me change myself. Thanks, everybody. Have an incredible end to the year. Thank goodness we can be with kids and see their faces. And take good care. Hope you come back next year. That's it for now.
Thank you.